Dozens of people are reported dead in Syria.
الإرهابيون القتلة يستخدمون أبواقهم لإعلان. Images that have stunned the world.
قاطعا استخدام أي مواد كيميائية أو سامة.
I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons.
These heinous actions by the Assad regime cannot be tolerated.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the stories we're covering this week. Relaunching the Trump presidency with the help of the Syria story and the U.S. news media. We have a sit-down interview with the man formerly known as the Iranian blog father, Hossein Derakhshan. It was the biggest collaboration in the history of journalism, the Panama Papers, and it just won the Pulitzer Prize. And another collaboration of a more anarchic sort, from Reddit. We're going to begin with those disturbing images from Syria, the aftermath of that chemical weapons attack that led to the U.S. missile strike. That video went to air showing the dead or dying victims, many of them children. And 50 hours later, American missiles were hitting their targets. The U.S. strike came 77 days into Donald Trump's presidency, 2.5 months that had been marked by unprecedented hostility between the U.S. news media and a new presidential administration. But nothing changes the narrative quite like pictures of a few Tomahawk missiles being launched into the night sky, and the tone shifted. Journalists praised Donald Trump's decisiveness, his morality, as well as the might of the U.S. military. He was described as something he'd seldom been accused of, being presidential. There are plenty of media angles in this story, from the haunting images of victims of chemical weapons, the impact the pictures are said to have had on Trump, to the video supplied by the Pentagon from those warships that is now driving this story. Our starting point this week is the Eastern Mediterranean, the launch site of the first direct U.S. airstrike on the forces of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. News travels fast, particularly when the pictures look like this. Roughly 2.5 hours after the missiles hit their intended target, the images distributed by the Pentagon were on the American airwaves, changing perceptions. Donald Trump watches a lot of TV, and that night he would have loved watching the U.S. media revert to form.
We've seen this time and time again. We've seen it in the first Gulf War, we've seen it in the second Iraqi war, and the media did a 180, going from attacking Donald Trump to praising him, like Fareed Zakaria.
I think Donald Trump became President of the United States.
And others on MSNBC, Brian Williams.
We see these beautiful pictures at night.
The media just falls in love with this affair.
Well, I want to say bizarrely sycophantic, but in a way it's not a surprise at all. You had the New York Times talking about how Donald Trump was acting from the heart when he launched this attack. I think they later amended their headline. The Washington Post was similarly effusive in its praise for the president.
It was notable that certain tropes and aspects that were used to attack the Trump administration, that the Trump administration is unpredictable and that it lacks experience and doesn't communicate across the administration well. All this was turned into something positive.
And even beautiful little babies.
Because morality was projected on that inexperience in saying that actually President Trump was very moved by the images of the dead and dying Syrians under the chemical attack, that he took an impulsive moral decision to intervene.
And I feel like many of these media outlets very much wanted to support Trump. They have this very strong idea of the inherent dignity of the presidency, and that they want to lose their access to and their ability to, in a way, suck up to power.
And I think there is a certain almost a need for familiar media tropes. A president announcing a military attack or launching a war is very familiar, and in a way it has the ability to, perhaps ironically, to soothe anxieties, because it shows that there is a certain continuity in policy in the pursuit of American interests.
This was a picture-driven story from the start, one that is paradoxical to the core. Chemical weapons have been banned for 20 years now. Reports of their use will always make headlines. But unlike conventional weapons, they leave bodies intact when they kill. The resulting news images, while shocking, are not graphic. There's no blood, no severed limbs. As horrifying as the pictures of chemical warfare are, news outlets are more likely to broadcast them than pictures of a bomb or a mortar attack, legal forms of warfare that are considered too bloody, too much for audiences to bear.
This is the problem. We don't trust the public as media. We think that, oh, you know, they might be too shocked by these images. Yeah, they might. But they also might get outraged like they have every time one of these stories has managed to push through. The conflict is one of the most documented wars in our history. And the question is, what do we show, what do we not show?
Not to say that seeing the effect on children after a chemical strike is not horrifying, but there are far more horrifying images, and there are far horrifying stories of entire families getting wiped out, half the population is displaced. And so we have one incident like this, and all of a sudden Trump reacts because nothing draws public opinion behind a president like ordering a strike when the media plays up an attack like by chemical weapons.
And we hope that as long as America stands for justice, then peace and harmony will, in the end, prevail.
Images of chemical attacks, for lack of a better word, privileged in news coverage and also in policy. Many Syrians say that the world actually does not care about the deaths of Syrians, they only care about how Syrians die. And when they die through chemical attacks, it gets more attention.
But the coverage has grown less frequent. Syria is perilous and expensive to cover. It's complex and confusing. Multiple factions and countries involved. And many news outlets have drifted away, returning only when the news turns dramatic. And when news coverage is more occasional than constant, that creates a lack of context that is ripe for exploitation.
All you get is the immediacy of the suffering. It's not necessarily untrue, but when this method is repeated and when this comes together, you get a view of suffering in which it's always essentially inexplicable, and news consumers who see these images, which is very strong urge to do something, to end this suffering. But because it's entirely shorn of context, it can be very easily used for very malign means by, in particular, by the people in power. And that is a form of propaganda without any lies even being necessary.
Our job as journalists is to get the pictures out there. Whether the right thing happens for the wrong reasons, that we cannot predict, but it is our job to tell these stories. And if we stop doing that, and if we stop expecting a change or expecting action from these stories, then what are we doing? We're just looking at other people's pain and putting it on TV. I don't know Donald Trump, obviously, so I can't tell you for sure how he feels or how this has impacted him. But I think public outrage has a lot to do with this, and I think public outrage on Syria crimes is a good thing.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week. It was a year ago, this month, that the Panama Papers story broke online. The team that did that work, and it was a big one, has been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for excellence in explanatory reporting. You may remember that the Listening Post was there when the story was hatched online.
We're live. Hey!
The year-long reporting operation was coordinated by the Washington-based International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, the ICIJ. There were 109 news organizations involved from 76 countries on 6 continents, digging into local angles. Together, they plowed through huge amounts of data, 2.6 terabytes in all, 11.5 million documents in multiple languages, initially leaked to the German newspapers Süddeutsche Zeitung. Having built a virtual newsroom across the globe, their journalism had an impact. The Prime Minister of Iceland resigned. The former British Prime Minister, David Cameron, admitted to profiting from his father's offshore holdings. France added Panama to its list of uncooperative tax havens. Argentina's President, Mauricio Macri, ended up before a judge. And Swiss authorities searched the offices of Europe's football body, UEFA. Gerard Ryle, the ICIJ's director, said of the Pulitzer, "This honor is a testament to the enterprise and teamwork of our staff and our partners here in the United States and around the world." Breaking news from Spain. It turns out that the country was never a colonial power. The Spaniards who invaded the Americas were on an evangelizing and civilizing mission. That's according to the president of RTVE, Spain's public broadcaster. Jose Antonio Sanchez offered that historical assessment in a speech at Madrid's Casa de America, a public institution that promotes relations between Spain and the Americas. Sanchez then doubled down on his theory, comparing the Aztec Empire in Mexico and Central America to Nazi Germany.
Lamentar la desaparición del Imperio Azteca es más o menos como sentir pesar por la derrota de los nazis en la Segunda Guerra Mundial.
RTVE's Journalists Union quickly disowned Sanchez's argument, saying it was ashamed. It went on to say, "We want to make clear our absolute rejection of the inappropriate discourse, which is strictly Sanchez's opinion and damages the image and reputation of public radio and television in Spain." Many historians consider the initial Spanish conquest of the Americas to be the first large-scale act of genocide of the modern era. Up to 8 million indigenous people were killed during that period. Fox News' Bill O'Reilly is taking a vacation, and according to a reporter with good sources at the network, it could be a long one, permanent even. As we reported last week, on the back of an investigation by the New York Times, a total of $13 million has been paid out to settle 5 court cases alleging sexual harassment against the host of the O'Reilly Factor, Fox's top-rated program. Fox has since said it has hired a law firm to look into the latest accusation against O'Reilly made by Wendy Walsh, a former guest on his show. Following the initial Times report on April 1st, advertisers started leaving O'Reilly's program in droves. Fox usually airs about 35 ads on O'Reilly's hour-long show. His program, April 7th, only featured 9 commercials. Gabriel Sherman of New York Magazine has authored a book on Fox and is considered the network's journalistic bête noire. Although Fox insists O'Reilly is just on vacation, returning April 24th, Sherman is reporting that 4 sources at the network told him Bill O'Reilly may never return. Allegations of sexual harassment are a recurring theme at Fox. Last year, its founder and chairman, Roger Ailes, was fired after numerous complaints were filed against him. Back in 2007, during the early days of the Listening Post and the heady days of the blogosphere, we interviewed Hossein Derakhshan, who was known as the Iranian blog father. As a dual Iranian-Canadian citizen, Derakhshan was blogging from outside the country and saying the kinds of things on politics that Iranians would rarely see in the country's government-approved media outlets. He was widely read, influential. He then returned to Tehran, kept writing, and was sentenced to almost 20 years in prison for his activities online. Derakhshan was pardoned in 2014, and he emerged from prison to discover that the internet had, during his time behind bars, become a quite different place. Gone was what he saw as the open web, a decentralized space that led web users to a variety of opinions, including reformist voices in Iran, operating in the blogosphere. It had been replaced with social media as the primary hub, platforms like Facebook and others producing something that he says looks more like television, much more focused on images than text, built around the things that we like and approve of rather than the things that people need to know. And just like TV, the social web is more entertaining than it is educational. Now, they may sound like the conclusions of someone nostalgic for the good old days, someone who's a little older, maybe a bit grumpier. But given Hossein Derakhshan's experience, it's a perspective worth listening to. We sat down with him last week at the International Journalism Festival in Perugia, Italy, to discuss the demise of the blogosphere, what has replaced it, and the current state of freedom of expression in Iran. Hossein Derakhshan, thanks for joining us today at the Listening Post.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with a quote of yours. The decline of the web in favor of social media entails grim consequences. What do you mean by that?
I think we're talking about a shift, a very serious shift that started from the West because of the new technologies, and then I think it's expanding around the world, which is about the dominance of visuals, especially pictures and videos, and the fact that they're replacing typography in many ways. When the internet emerged, it was text-centered. It was a decentralized space. It was a very active sort of communication. It wasn't as passive as television. It was also very non-linear because you would always be able to browse things at the same time, and hyperlinks were at the center of this shift because hyperlinks enabled you to start from somewhere and end up somewhere completely different from where you started. And this is all gone now. You only get to see one mobile app like Facebook, and then you would only scroll. You don't click that much on the links, and you're not going to surprising places anymore. So this new space, which is built based on your habits and based on popularity of things, because if you post something and it's not popular enough, it wouldn't be visible to your friends who are following you, is creating a space which is, I would argue, even worse than television. The decentralization, the linearity, and I think the most important thing, the diversity of voices is now gone with these specific kind of algorithms that dominate social networks.
So you were severely offline from 2008 to 2014.
Yes.
Had you not been in prison at that time, would that shift, which you saw when you came out in 2014 because you were equipped with a fresh pair of eyes, is that something that you think, had you been living in it, you would have even noticed?
I would have noticed it, but with less shock, probably.
Because it jumped out at you?
Yeah, because I was really shocked when I started a new blog after I was released and pardoned, because I was allowed to write again. And then I realized that without social networks, whatever you write outside these platforms wouldn't even be visible, because their algorithms prioritize and privilege native materials. So then I realized that that is exactly why blogosphere is a graveyard now, because all bloggers have gone through the same process of trying to promote things on social networks, and they've realized that this is not working very well, so they have actually moved what they've been writing.
When you came out of jail, you had a choice. You have Canadian citizenship,
yes,
and Iranian citizenship. Most people who had just been jailed for 6 years would have left that country, I imagine, and never gone back. Mm-hmm. Why did you stay?
My family lives there, my home is there. Iran is a really interesting, vibrant place to be active there. And now that I'm allowed to write again and be active as a journalist and an author, why wouldn't I use that opportunity? The whole purpose of me coming back to Iran and face prison was to be able to work again, to live again in my country, and to contribute positively.
But you have to watch very carefully what it is that you say. You cannot write with the same freedom that you wrote with before being imprisoned.
Yes, but then it's not as black and white as you would probably think from the outside. The range of topics that you can actually discuss has been constantly expanding. Things that now you see in print on Iranian newspapers is incomparable to 20 years ago, for example. That I remember people were jailed because of writing about them.
Some people would suggest that your newly tempered writings are a sign of maturity. I'm wondering, on the other hand, if this is more a change on the part of the authorities there. Do you have the impression that the Iranian government has a better understanding now of the way these media work, and perhaps aren't quite as quick to act as they may have been 2006, 2008?
That's true. They've constantly improved in their understanding of media and its impact on society, especially since I think the foreign-based satellite televisions have started, the BBC Persian and others. They have grown really worried that if they keep the internal space too closed and too limited, then people wouldn't watch or wouldn't read or wouldn't trust anything that they see.
Because they have alternatives.
Yes.
Telegram, the messenger service, is a major player in Iran. Give me an idea of what goes on Telegram, how Iranians use it, and why it is that you think that the Iranian authorities tolerate it.
Telegram is not just a messenger if anybody's familiar with it, they have a feature called channels, which is basically like a newsreader. You subscribe to separate channels, to different channels, and then you would be receiving whatever is posted on that channel. For instance, the BBC Persian has more than 700,000 subscribers to its channel. So it's much easier for people to get the news through these channels. Telegram in Iran has replaced email, it's replaced websites, and even many people who used to have blogs and who used to write blogs are finding Telegram an easier and more accessible tool for publishing. More than 60% of the whole bandwidth of the country is spent on Telegram. Then, because it was also very effective during the last parliament elections in Iran, and reformists used this as their most effective medium, some people within the system have grown worried about a possible effect of Telegram in the next elections. But the government is very resistant to the idea of blocking it. And I think they've been successful so far.
Oftentimes Iran is lumped in with other countries that are accused of being authoritarian. But on media, the Iranians do have a different approach to Facebook and Twitter, both of which are available, although filtered. The Chinese won't even let those companies onto their territory. Why does Iran allow things such as Facebook and Twitter, however filtered, when other governments such as China's do not?
Part of it is logistic, because it's not easy and it's very expensive to block the whole country from the outside internet. In order to do that, you would have to have a nationwide intranet, which is very expensive to make. And I'm sure there has been a very lively debate behind the scenes within the Iranian government. There are some people following the idea of having an intranet instead of the internet. Fortunately, they have not won. It also shows this matureness that I'm speaking about, that they're not really afraid of random people or ordinary people discussing politics or even insulting things. Because when you have so much information, the visibility of every single piece of it would become much, much less. You wouldn't necessarily have to react to every single thing that you don't like as an authority.
If blogs, as you're saying, are virtually no more, and they used to call you the Iranian blog father, what term do you go by now?
I'm still writing, and I'm still blogging, but on a different platform, which is called Twitter, which was supposed to be a micro-blogging platform. But those blogs that we owned and we hosted on our own websites are all dead, and it's become a graveyard, unfortunately.
Micro-blog father doesn't really have the same ring to it, does it?
No.
Hossein Derakhshan, it is delightful to see you again. Thank you for talking to us at the Listening Post today.
Thank you for having me.
Finally, some of Hossein Derakhshan's ideas about what the internet could or should be are embodied in the social platform and online discussion board, Reddit. A couple of weeks ago, the site hosted an experiment. It put up a digital blank canvas called Reddit Place, and it invited users to create something. Anyone could contribute, but only by painting one pixel at a time. The canvas quickly became a hub of collaborative efforts. Sub-communities popped up where users discussed how they should work together. This is the internet, so inevitably some of the first images to emerge included swear words and swastikas. But 72 hours later, more than 1 million people had created a digital tapestry that includes flags, peace symbols, sports logos, album covers, and some artistic masterpieces. The end product is chaotic, confusing, but oddly mesmerizing, a bit like the medium itself. We'll see you next time here at the Listening Post.